Good day, Fadi Farra, Managing Director at Whiteshield Partners. We have the launch of the Global Labor Resilience Index 2021 today. Very important day. And what would you say is the importance of the GLRI 2021 in the context of COVID-19 and the crisis that we're facing?
Thank you. Since its inception, Whiteshield Partners has been looking at how to connect the dots between different public policy, understanding what is actually that connection that makes a difference. The Global Labor Resilience Index is a part of those studies and those fundamental research that we have been doing to better understand those connections. Why is it so important? Because we look at, through the lenses of this index, at potential shocks that should be absorbed by different economies. It could be technological shocks, it could be economic shocks, but more fundamentally, especially this year, of course, health shocks. And when you look at those shocks, you cannot just look at it through the lenses of one ministry or one organization. You have to look at the entire ecosystem and how this works. That's the foundation of the work we do, connecting the dots between the different elements. More concretely, the GLRI this year is giving us three main messages. The first, the fundamental importance of trust and the ability to instill trust within the system. The second one is the ability to work as a whole of governments and whole of country, connecting all the pieces of the ecosystem. And the third part, which is equally important, is the localization of the work, the need to decentralize some of the decisions. Those are some of the key themes coming out of the GLRI this year.
Thank you, Fadi. Thank you for those insights on Global Labor Resilience Index 2021. Could you give some direction to governments today if they had to take action over the next year to 2 years on improving their resilience? What would you suggest?
What we did this year is to step back, readjust the methodology of the GLRI around three different stages. The first one is when you have to absorb the shock, technological, economic, health, or any other shock. The second one is when you have to adapt. And the third is when you have to transform. Countries that are resilient are the countries that are able to follow this curve explicitly by adapting their policies. As an example, when you're in the stage of absorbing the shock, is to put in place the rapid response teams to be able to look at which airports to close or open, how to adapt to the labor laws, what to do very short term, not to use the usual response mechanisms that are in place. Second, the ability to adapt. Adapting is mainly done at the local level, not always at the central level. And that means delegating, decentralizing, allowing municipalities, regions, and so on to put in place the right mechanism. But the key is the transformation, is to get the learning from the first stages, absorbing, adapting, and transforming. And to transform, the whole of country approach is fundamental. Think about this as not just the public sector and the private sector and civil society. Think about every single agent in a society connecting as a network and being able to respond. And when you have a new shock, to have resilience across the network. That part is the fundamental learning for policymakers going forward.
Very clear, Fadi. Now, one of the aspects of the framework for the GLRI is to have a structural pillar and a cyclical pillar. Structural being longer-term changes and cyclical, shorter-term policy-oriented changes. To what extent do you think these two aspects of resilience are important for countries today? Is there one that's more important than the other?
Thank you. The GLRI is a fundamental research that has been conducted under the leadership of Sir Christopher Pissarides, a Nobel Prize winner in economics, in labor economics. And when we talk about fundamental research, we look at two angles. We look at structural reforms and cyclical reforms. Now, why are they both important? Because you have to think about it like a car. If you drive your car and you drive it too fast without having the right fuel, that means that fundamentally you're not putting the right policies in place, the right cyclical actions in place. If your car is not a good car, if its shape, if its foundations, the engine, and everything else is not right, then you have to work on this part. You cannot drive your car without having a car that can actually be driven and the fuel that goes with it. Those are the two components of structural and cyclical. Fundamentally, we're talking about the capabilities of a country, the fundamental capabilities, but also the short-term actions that have to be put in place. Interestingly enough, the GLRI measures not only both pillars, but the comparison between both pillars. And that means your ability to balance the structural and cyclical pillars. The closer you are, the faster you are. The wider the gap, the more you have a challenge to address.
Thank you, Fadi. And then last question that I have for you regards the more advanced industrial countries and the least developed countries. There's quite a gap, obviously, in development. Do you think that the Global Labor Resilience Index can provide any insights in what the most advanced countries in the world industrially should be doing versus the least developed?
I think I would turn it around. It's not a question of having developed or less developed countries, but more the gap on the index. Today on the index, we have a convergence of most countries in the middle of the pack and the lower of the pack. So countries which are less resilient to somehow resilient. But the leading countries, the gap between them is becoming even wider. That means that in effect, we're seeing countries which are either developed or developing, which are becoming a lot more resilient, therefore able to absorb, adapt and transform regardless of their level of development. And we're seeing countries which are rather converging towards the middle and the end of the pack. So what does it mean concretely? It means that regardless of your level of development, be it based on GDP or your own capabilities, what matters now is the agility of government to adapt. That is what matters. And this is the same for every country in the world, regardless of your level of development. Again, your ability to put in place the rapid response team, your ability to decentralize, and your ability to act as a whole of country, connecting the dots between the different elements of the ecosystem.
Thank you, Fadi. It's a great message of hope that the level of labor resilience does not depend on your level of economic development, and definitely that you can have action at all stages of development. Thank you again for this interview, for the launch of the Global Labor Resilience Index 2021. And we look forward to working with governments to put all these recommendations in place.
Thanks again.